Before we get into methods, it's worth remembering one hard truth. During World War II, soil decided who ate and who went hungry. Fertilizer factories were repurposed for explosives, imports were cut off, and chemical inputs simply didn't exist for civilians. Yet yields increased. Gardens produced more calories per square foot than many modern plots. That wasn't luck. It was composting done with discipline, patience, and an understanding of biology that came from necessity, not theory. What we now call perfect soil was built quietly behind homes, barns, and bombed-out buildings, using systems that modern gardeners often overlook because they aren't fast or convenient. The opening minute that explains why these methods still outperform modern shortcuts. If you had asked a civilian gardener in 1943 how to improve soil, they wouldn't have said, buy something. They would have said, build it. Wartime composting wasn't about recycling waste. It was about manufacturing fertility when nothing else was available. Every peel, bone, ash bucket, and weed had a job. Nothing went to landfill, because landfills didn't feed families. The reason these compost systems worked so well is that they were designed for long-term soil health, not quick results. They focused on microbial balance, moisture control, and mineral return, all without chemicals. That's why, many victory gardens actually outperformed modern raised beds, even when the soil was poor. What follows are the principles those gardeners relied on, explained plainly and practically, so you can apply them today without any gimmicks. Back in the day, WWII compost piles were built in slow, deliberate layers. Gardeners would alternate kitchen waste, dried leaves, soil, and ash, because they understood that microbes needed balance, not excess. Too much green material, well, that just created rot and smell. On the other hand, too much dry material stalled decomposition altogether. The practical approach was to treat compost like soil building in miniature. A modern gardener can do this by layering vegetable scraps with shredded cardboard, a thin sprinkling of garden soil, and a small amount of wood ash, then simply repeating the process. This creates steady decomposition and preserves nutrients instead of burning them off. Wartime compost included materials many people now throw away. Wood ash from cooking fires was saved for potassium and calcium. Crushed bones were buried deep in compost piles to slowly release phosphorus. This wasn't guesswork. Agricultural bulletins of the era encouraged mineral recovery because artificial fertilizers were unavailable. Today, adding small amounts of hardwood ash and finely crushed bones to compost can correct mineral deficiencies that bagged compost often ignores, especially in root crop beds. One reason compost during the Second World War produced such rich soil was, strict moisture control. Piles were covered with burlap, straw, or even old sacks to protect them from the rain. You see, excess water leaches nutrients downward and just washes the fertility away. Gardeners only watered their compost when, after squeezing a handful, the material failed to hold together. You can do the same by covering your compost pile and checking the moisture by hand, instead of relying on the weather or sprinklers. Contrary to modern advice, compost during the war wasn't turned all that often. Turning was pretty labour-intensive, and heat loss really mattered in cold climates. So instead, piles were built properly from the start and then left to mature. This allowed fungal networks to develop, which, really improved soil structure. For today's gardener, fewer turns mean better humus formation, especially if the pile is built with correct layering from the start. WWII gardeners composted weeds aggressively, but carefully. Young weeds were composted immediately, while mature weeds were dried before use to prevent reseeding. This converted invasive growth into nitrogen-rich material. A practical approach today is pulling weeds early and composting them under heavier brown layers, preventing regrowth while feeding soil life. It's a simple yet effective way to keep those pesky weeds at bay and nourish the soil at the same time. Compost didn't stop in winter. It slowed, but it continued. Kitchen scraps were layered with soil and straw all winter long, creating partially finished compost by spring. This method ensured that even during the cold months, the composting process was still ticking along, albeit at a slower pace. This meant beds were fed early, giving crops a head start. You can do this now by continuing to layer compost through cold months instead of shutting systems down. By keeping the compost going, you provide your plants with a much-needed boost right from the start of the growing season. So, rather than digging compost deep into the soil, gardeners during the Second World War would simply spread it right on the surface and, let the worms and the weather do the work of mixing it in. This method helped preserve the natural soil layers and, importantly, prevented compaction. These days, gardeners can follow the same principle by top-dressing their beds instead of tilling. It's a straightforward way to improve water retention and, honestly, keep roots healthier in the long run. Now, heavy feeders like cabbage and potatoes, they got richer compost, while legumes received just a lighter touch. This approach avoided wasting nutrients and kept the soil nicely balanced. Applying compost strategically rather than just spreading it evenly across all the beds, it actually improves yields without needing any extra input. Compost wasn't spread the moment it was finished. Instead, it was saved for planting and transplanting, when the crops needed it most. This careful timing reduced nutrient loss, and, it really helped improve establishment too. Today, applying compost at planting rather than months earlier can dramatically improve results. The strength of WWII composting was intention. Nothing was accidental. Materials were chosen, timing mattered, and patience was rewarded. These methods created soil that improved every year instead of degrading. Modern products often feed plants temporarily, but wartime compost fed the soil first, which fed crops consistently. If you value forgotten knowledge, practical history, and skills that actually work, this is the kind of information worth preserving. These compost methods fed families through rationing, shortages, and uncertainty, and they remain just as effective today. If you found this useful, subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who still believes in learning from the past, and keep these lessons alive by putting them to work in your own soil.